Welcome to Global Connections with Robert Siegel, Navigating the New Normal, presented by the American Friends of Rabbi Medical Center. Our monthly Leaders Forum addresses vital issues facing society and the economy, real estate and technology, medicine and science. My name is Dr. Joshua Plout. I'm the Executive Director of American Friends of Rabbi Medical Center, AFRMC, a 501c3 National American Charitable Organization based in New York City. We at AFRMC represent Israel's premier hospital, Rabbi Medical Center in Petach Tikva in Greater Tel Aviv, the leading institution named in honor of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. The hospital is a model of coexistence. It serves 1 million patients annually from all ethnic and religious backgrounds with the same compassionate care. We would like to share an overview of the work being done at the Rabbi Medical Center.
Rabin Medical Center, located nearby Tel Aviv, is one of Israel's largest and most advanced academic hospitals, named after former Israeli Prime Minister and Nobel Prize winner for Peace Yitzhak Rabin. Comprising Bellinson and Hasharon campuses, it has been a national leader in medicine, science, and compassion towards patients since its founding in 1936. As the flagship hospital of Israel's largest healthcare provider, Clalit, with more than 8,200 dedicated staff members, RMC gives treatment to around 1 million patients every year, performs more than 70% of all organ transplants, and provides health care to every 6th cancer patient in the country. RMC is a home for internationally acclaimed centers of excellence, including Davidoff Cancer Center, Samueli Institute for Cancer Research, and a new brain and heart center, the Tower of Hope. Through groundbreaking research, AI-driven medicine, cutting-edge technologies, and global collaborations, RMC is redefining what is possible in modern healthcare. In moments of peace and in times of war, we stand on the front line. As a main trauma center, RMC is healing soldiers and civilians, reuniting families, and strengthening the Israeli social fabric and resilience. Delivering not only world-class treatment, but also human connection, healing, and hope. Rabin Medical Center, a beacon of innovation, excellence, and care.
Our host and moderator for Global Connections is Robert Siegel, former host of All Things Considered on National Public Radio for 31 years. Over the course of an hour each month, Global Connections features guests who Robert Siegel interviews as they explore important issues in our world. And now, on to today's program. Today's Global Connections topic is American Anti-Semitism Today. Thank you to our very special guests, Jonathan Sarna, Professor Emeritus of American Jewish History at Brandeis University, Abraham Foxman, National Director Emeritus of the Anti-Defamation League, and Rabbi David Saperstein, former United States Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom and Director Emeritus of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. And now, Global Connections with Robert Siegel.
Thank you, Josh. Our subject today is anti-Semitism in America. How bad is it? Why has it risen at this time? How should Jews respond to it? And do we have allies in the fight against it? All difficult questions, and we have a panel that's more than up to addressing them. I'll interview each of our guests one-on-one, and then we'll have a discussion and a question and answer session. If you're watching us live, you can suggest a question for our discussion session by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We start with some history. And there's nobody more qualified to speak of American Jewish history than our first panelist, Jonathan Sarna. He is Professor Emeritus of American Jewish History at Brandeis University and also the Chief Historian at Brandeis's Museum of American Jewish History. Professor Sarna is the author of many books, including American Judaism, A History. Jonathan Sarna, welcome back.
Thank you. A joy to be with you.
And if you would, I'd like you to put this in some context. Should we regard the present anti-Semitism in America as something that is essentially new, or something that's always been there? And what's happened is that it used to be in eclipse for a few decades after World War II. We're back to normal.
Well, we've certainly had it before. Indeed, it goes back to the very beginning of Jewish life in America when Peter Stuyvesant, who had no great love for Jews, tried to keep them out and said very nasty things about the Jewish people back in 1654. And certainly the 1920s and the 1930s saw people like Henry Ford and Father Charles Coughlin, who was widely listened to on the radio, spewing anti-Semitism. But after World War II, anti-Semitism declined decade by decade. People learned about what anti-Semitism had done in Europe, and America became more liberal, and every decade saw more Jews involved in public life. Anti-Semitic organizations went out of business, and Jews achieved things that they had not been able to achieve before. Quotas disappeared and the like. So by the time we reached the 1990s, young American Jews think anti-Semitism, that's history. It goes the way of anti-Mormonism, anti-Catholicism. It's done. Indeed, I had students who claimed, yeah, my grandparents experienced it, but I never have. And indeed, the intermarriage rate, 72% of non-Orthodox Jews married non-Jews. That suggested acceptance. And indeed, in the year 2000, Joe Lieberman is a candidate for the vice presidency, Orthodox Jew, and he says only in America. So it's understandable why people thought, good, we scratched this problem off the list, we'll deal with other issues. But actually, anti-Semitism increases after the year 2000 and becomes more and more prevalent. For a few years, we didn't pay attention much to it, although no less than the president of Harvard then, Larry Summers, gave a speech in 2002, I think, in which he said, it's growing, we should pay attention. But we began to pay attention. Charlottesville, Jews will not replace us. And of course, everybody began to pay attention after the shooting at Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh.
In Pittsburgh.
All right. And since then...
Why? Why should it have happened then?
I think some people would say, well, the generation that heard about the Holocaust passed from the scene, and a new generation didn't know about it. Even we see from polling, had some doubts whether it happened. Immigration had something, I think, to do with it. I think we will discover that there were funders who were happy to promote anti-Semitism and anti-Israel feelings, just like in the 30s. It took many years till this was discovered, but we now know that Goebbels was behind people like Father Coughlin. I think we will discover that there were similar folks from Iran and elsewhere funding anti-Semitism. And I'm sure that there are other factors as well. And then, of course, the October 7th, there was a concerted anti-Semitic campaign. But the fact is that it did grow year by year.
But just to put this in some context, you wouldn't say that gains that had been made in the areas of, say, fair housing or the end of anti-Semitic codicils or employment or promotions. We're not going back to where we were in the 1920s at this point, are we?
Well, I would say the people who have studied certain areas like universities notice that there are far fewer Jewish students being accepted at top universities. There are far fewer professors of Jewish background. When I started, probably 1 in 5 at top universities was Jewish. Today, it's more like 1 in 25. There is a man named Jacob Savage who has published several articles in which he really shows how, to his mind, quotas, not with that name, but quotas have come back, and there are whole areas of American life where Jews find it very difficult to get a toehold. There are far fewer Jewish winners of prizes. Even my friends who are writers tell me much harder to persuade editors to accept and publish Jewish-related books. So certainly in the eyes of the Jewish community, things have gotten much worse for Jews. But I agree with you. I haven't heard that there are places where Jews can't live, but I've certainly heard that there are plenty of frightened Jews. Indeed, a recent poll said something on the order of 3/4 of Jewish students had either experienced or witnessed anti-Semitism, and they were very frightened. That was not the case back when I was a student. So things have changed, and unfortunately, much to the worse.
Well, Professor Sarna, stay with us for our discussion period in a little while. Thank you very much for that opening offering. In introducing our next panelist, I suppose I could say that while Professor Sarna has been writing about American Jewish history, Abe Foxman has been shaping American Jewish history at the same time. Mr. Foxman was from 1987 until 2015 National Director of the Anti-Defamation League. As my colleague at Moment Magazine, Amy Schwartz, wrote last year, it used to be pretty simple. If the Jewish community didn't know whether something was worth declaring anti-Semitic and fighting about, you knew what to do. You called Abe Foxman, and he would answer the question for you, and that would be that. Mr. Foxman, by the way, is also an honorary or a member of the honorary board of the American Friends of Rabin Medical Center. And thank you very much for joining us once again.
My pleasure.
Let's start. First of all, I don't know if you have any amendments to the history that Jonathan Sarna has given us, but where we are, given that history, what are we supposed to do about it? How are we supposed to react to it?
I do have some amendments to Professor Sarna. I think it's always been there. It's always been bad. And those of us who spend a lifetime measuring it, following it, dealing with it, counteracting, I think we always knew that it was serious. One of the problems is nobody took it seriously besides the American Jewish Congress, American Jewish Committee, the ADL, and those institutions whose job it was to defend the Jewish community against anti-Semitism. Now, the Jewish community didn't take it seriously, the rest of our society, but it was always there. The difference was that we developed a strategy of containment. We didn't eliminate it. We basically put it into the sewer, found a way to put a cover on it. And people would say to me, what's the difference between anti-Semitism in the US and anti-Semitism in Europe? And my answer would be, in Europe, there are rules and laws, but they don't implement them. In the United States, the Constitution permits you to be a bigot and anti-Semite, but there are consequences. There were social consequences. And part of the strategy, if you will, of the last 50 years of the institutions whose job it was to defend the Jewish defense agencies, basically was to keep it contained, to keep it beneath the surface, to put a price on anti-Semitism, and it worked. It worked. Listen, we broke all barriers in housing, as you indicated, certainly in academia, in business. Everything that used to be closed was open. So then what happened? What happened is that America experienced a revolution of sorts, a political revolution, a cultural revolution, and a technological revolution. First of all, I would say politically, things all of a sudden overnight change. You can call it Trumpism. It's part of the Trump era, whether you attribute it just to him or the atmosphere. And that is, all of a sudden, it was okay. That means Trump did not create the Charlottesville 200. They were always there, but they knew not to have the chutzpah to march and say and spout their anti-Semitism. They woke up one day and they felt, whoa, you know what? America has changed. Politically and culturally, it's now okay for us, and it surfaced. Truth was very important to us in fighting anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a big lie. All of a sudden, we lost truth. We lost civility. We lost the instruments with which we used to fight anti-Semitism. And finally, probably the most significant factor in the legitimacy, the growth, the spread of anti-Semitism is the technological revolution. And that's the internet and that's social media. And all of a sudden, what used to be taboo was okay. No guardrails, no legislation, nothing. You can.
Well, there's no editor there necessarily to say that's taboo. You can't say that.
Right. And so the environment totally changed. And that whole strategy to work for us all of a sudden wasn't working. So now you ask the question, we need to come up with a new strategy. I think first and foremost, I think we need to worry about our security. There is a stigma to being a Jew today. There wasn't a stigma for being Jewish. In fact, lehefach, it was something proud. You were proud of being Jewish, the achievements of the Jewish community, the contribution of the Jewish community. Israel in its fighting to survive and to win the wars against the Arabs, it was something of pride. Today, there's a stigma. We see it with the kids who hide their identities. I don't know how many Jews have taken off mezuzahs. I hope not many. So we are in a different situation today because the environment has changed, and we are still operating with the old rules, and we have to change our approach to a new environment.
So provocatively, the New York Times columnist Bret Stephens proposed in a speech recently that part of the new strategy should be dismantling, doing away with the ADL, the American Jewish Committee, all the institutional Jewish life as it now exists, leaving aside his specific criticisms of those organizations. Should there be new organizations? I mean, is it time for a new generation to create its own strategies that all of us are too old for?
We have more new organizations than you can count. That means what happened with the growth and spread of anti-Semitism is the Jewish community responded with institutions, with organizations, with money, etc. We need a new strategy. We don't need more organizations. We certainly don't need less. I respect Bret Stephens in so many ways. I don't understand it. It's not an either or. Mm-hmm. Yes, you need pride. Absolutely. I once went to a seminar that studied why the Jews survive. Will the Jews survive 2050? And those who prepared the seminar did a study of Toynbee, of Spengler, of the historians of history, to see Manishtana. Why did the Greeks and the Romans perish, and why did Jewish civilization survive? Mm-hmm. And they came up with a very simple yet very complex answer. And the answer basically was that after the Roman Empire fell, no Roman ran around the world saying, "How do I become a Roman?" After the Greek Empire fell, no Greek wanted to be a Greek. But after the first destruction of the temple, and the second destruction, and the first exile, and the second exile, the Jews brushed themselves off. And if after the Shoah, they stood up and said, "I want to be Jewish," that's the secret of Jewish survival. And that's still, and that's what Bret is talking about. We need Jewish pride, we need Jewish identity, but that's not enough. It's not an either or. You still need to know the facts. You still need to advocate. You still need legislation. You still need education. You still need to find ways how to deal with the internet. And that's not going to happen by sitting in a day school or going on a trip to Israel.
Do Jews have effective allies in doing this?
Well, that's always been a problematic issue. Look, I spent a lifetime fighting anti-Semitism, believing that I need to reach out and I need allies because it's part of our value system. It's tzedek, tzedek, tirdov. I never felt or believed that if I reach out, with the civil rights and I reach out to LGBT, they will come and embrace me and stand up. I did it because it was right. But also, if you raise the level of tolerance in our society, it raises the level for everybody. And an example to me is the Civil Rights Act of 1964. A lot of Jews said, Mashmita L'Sinai, what does this have to do with us? It's for the African-American community. Fine, wonderful, we'll do it. But in truth is, it did have to do with us because we broke discrimination in hospitality, in accommodations based on the Civil Rights Act. I remember that when the Civil Rights Act passed, the ADL then submitted reservations to several hotels in Florida who discriminated against Jews. And the names with the Jews came back booked, and the names with non-Jews came back non-booked. But now we had a weapon. We had the Civil Rights Act, which said you cannot discriminate in interstate commerce. And so the Civil Rights Act, which primarily was passed in order to raise the level of respect and lack of discrimination in the African-American community, was used to the Jewish community. Mm-hmm. So I did it. I always believed we need to do it because it serves us all. But I never expected that they're going to come like on October 7th and embrace us. But I will tell you, while I was not surprised at what happened on October 7th and aftermath and anti-Semitism, I was shocked. I was shocked by, I don't think we can name 10 organizations that we worked with that stood up for us in the last 2 years. And I also was shocked with the depth of the hatred, which I knew was there, but not to the extent that it's here.
Well, I'm sure we'll be coming back to October 7th in our discussion period. But for now, Abe Foxman, thank you very much, and stay with us. Our third panelist is David Saperstein. For over 40 years, Rabbi Saperstein was National Director and Chief Legal Counsel, he's also a lawyer, for the Union for Reform Judaism's Religious Action Center. President Barack Obama named David his U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom. He was the first non-Christian to hold that post. He is strongly associated with the reform movement's strong commitment to civil rights. David, thanks for joining us once again.
Pleasure to be with you, Robert.
Let's start with trying to understand, or how you understand this phenomenon of increased anti-Semitism. Why now? What do you think is happening right now that's different from 1990 or 1980?
I think that both Jonathan and Abe have lifted up core pieces of this. It was precisely the Supreme Court decisions in the 40s, robustly interpreting the religion clauses, and then the civil rights decisions that it made and the passage of the laws that Abe talked about that barred discrimination, that transformed the experience of the American Jewish community, where they had been on the peripheries of many parts of American society, barred from many corporate boardrooms, barred from certain legal firms, are limited in the numbers who would be admitted to universities. We were on the peripheries of American society. Now we were able to move into the opportunities created for us into the very center of American political, academic, economic, and social and cultural life in America. There really has been no point in diaspora Jewish history where we have enjoyed the rights and opportunities that we have had here in the United States in the past 75 years. And the breakdown of that has already been mentioned here. Here, first from the dark corners of the anonymity of the internet and social media, messages that never would have been heard mainstream before began to appear. And the voices of those who were public about who they were, right-wing extremists or left-wing extremists, but primarily on the right, here all of a sudden had platforms that could spread those messages, not just throughout the United States, but globally, and right-wing forces in Europe and across the globe were feeding each other here. So all of that was going on. One other point that hasn't been raised yet, we don't have accurate polling data from before World War II, but the kind of polling data we have indicates as many as 50% of the American people held anti-Semitic attitudes. After World War II, that began to go down solidly. And while it's hard to prove cause and effect, it correlated with the rising levels of education in America. The kind of things, as opposed to the politicized Israel-oriented anti-Semitism we're dealing with today, the kind of anti-Semitism measured by Abe's ADL of the classic indicia of this very much would be affected by educational levels. It was not a panacea, it was not a vaccine, it was not a cure, but the levels, the percentage of Americans holding anti-Semitic attitudes plunged here. But it still meant that there were 10, 11, 12% of Americans holding those attitudes, which meant 25 million American adults had those attitudes. And it was the social constraints that Abe described that really contained it. You couldn't make it in American society nationally if you were overtly anti-Semitic or overtly racist or overtly misogynist. Here, so much of that is broken down. The corrosiveness of civil discourse, the President of the United States giving his hechsher, his stamp of approval to demonization of different groups, there to the promulgation of myths about groups he doesn't like, here has greatly intensified this development in American life. The only thing I will say, where I'm not sure where if Abe and I are 100% in the same place, is I think it is absolutely clear, as Abe said, here, there's no Noah's Ark that will protect the Jewish community if everything falls apart for the LGBT community and the immigrant community and the Black community here in minority groups of all kinds across the country. We're in this battle together. And allyship is indispensable in fighting it. So when we ask what we should do, here, that is always my first thing, really reaffirm how much we're in it together, even while we deal with the complexity of that politicized anti-Semitism around Israel that has divisive impact on that historic coalition.
It's funny, but when you mentioned the polling, I was always struck by the polls of very recent years, in which Americans had far less problem with their children marrying someone of a different religion, but marrying someone of a different political party
Right.
raised their hackles. So we traded in one liberalization for, on the other hand, a measure of how divided we are. You've served on the boards of NAACP, People for the American Way, Common Cause. These are groups that we generally associate with, broadly speaking, liberal, small d, democratic society and institutions. If it gets difficult for a Jew to both be a public supporter of Israel and to work together with progressive groups, do you think that it makes sense for Jews to realign? That is to take up the offers from the other side of the aisle and identify with more conservative groups. As some do. I don't want to suggest that no one does that now, but
on every issue in politics, we make coalitions that work on those issues together. The fact that you may work with one set of partners on the Israel issue doesn't mean that you don't work with a different set of partners on many of the other issues that you have to address. So when we see the attack on democracy that this administration has been leading and that the Republican Party has given its stamp of approval to, the attack on the rule of law, on due process in America, on freedom of speech, the attack on the law firms, the attack on the media in this country, the future of the Jewish people is going to depend indispensably on the ability to maintain those coalitions, even if we have differences on Israel that will battle out in other contexts, here to really make it clear that we are committed bedrock principles to the fundamental freedoms that gave Jews more rights, more freedoms, more opportunities than we've ever known before outside Israel. So here, everyone has to make those kinds of decisions themselves. It is interesting to note how divided the Jewish community itself is on the Israel issue, on what took place in Gaza. And so even within that issue, Robert, there are diverse coalitions that Jews are involved with, et cetera. The question of when does criticism of Israel step over the line into anti-Semitism, there are some serious divisions in the Jewish community but I think those coalitions still are indispensable.
David Saperstein, thank you so much. It's great to talk with you and hear you again. And I'd like to bring back Abe Foxman and Jonathan Sarna, and to pick up exactly on the question that David Saperstein just raised about the line between criticism of Israel and anti-Semitism. And I'm curious to hear from the three of you as to how you've been able for yourself to best define that distinction. We don't want to criminalize people holding a political view that we disagree with. Abe Foxman, you said you want to take certain odious views and keep them in the sewer, although we can't do that anymore. But where, and we'll start with Jonathan Sarna, where's the line that you see? How do you answer the question, is that anti-Israel or is that anti-Semitic?
Yeah, first of all, I have to say, I think the big attacks on Jews, the shooting in Australia, the attacks in the United States, there's been widespread agreement what anti-Semitism is. Part of me thinks that we are suffering from the politics of distraction. Let's not talk about anti-Semitism. let's talk about the definition and where anti-Zionism is and anti-Semitism isn't. For a lot of people, there is no difference. Anti-Zionism is simply a form of anti-Semitism, and that's why, even though they may shout about the Intifada, what they're really doing is attacking Jews because they happen to be Jews, which is classic anti-Semitism. Now, we do have to be careful. Not every criticism of Prime Minister Netanyahu is anti-Semitism. But attacks on the very existence of the state of Israel, on whether there should be such a state, that when you don't attack any other nation state, that already seems to me to cross a line.
Okay, well, let me ask Abe Foxman the same question. How do you describe the line when what you're hearing ceases to be criticism of Israel and starts striking you as anti-Semitic?
Robert, a long time ago, what the world community did is make Israel the Jew of the nations. And so what developed on the international community is an approach which said, everybody can do whatever except the Jewish state. So every country in the world can decide on its capital except the Jewish state. Every country in the world can defend itself and decide how it defends itself except the Jewish state. So it's that concept of seeing Israel differently than any other nation. That we had Zionism, racism in the UN, if you remember. So it built. I know. To me, it's much simpler. If you want to criticize Israel, say Gesundheit. God bless you. There's more criticism per square inch in Israel than any other country in the world. My test is very simple. You don't like what Israel's doing on X? Is there any other country in the world that you don't like the same thing that they're doing? If the only place in the world that you don't like what they're doing, that means you don't care how any other country defends itself except Israel. To me, that's anti-Semitism. If Zionism, there are people who are internationalists. God bless them. You don't have to be a nationalist. You don't have to embrace a nationalism. But if the only national independence movement of sovereignty, the Jewish people's movement, is apartheid and is racist, then you're an anti-Semite. If you don't want to be a nationalist, if you don't like Zionism, you better not like French nationalism or Palestinian nationalism. But if Palestinian nationalism is wonderful, but Jewish nationalism is apartheid, right? You're an anti-Semite. You're just using a platform which you hope will cover your bigotry in a political sense.
But let me just ask you about one specific, which I can't quite get out of my mind when you say that. That is, there is a far nationalist right in Israel that's very active in the West Bank. And the people most noted for it are they're political descendants of a guy named Meir Kahane, whom the American Jewish community, as well as the Israelis, denounced as a racist. And it was quite unusual. I mean, I remember, I think the ADL would demonstrate what they'd like to see happen to, the black Muslim from Chicago, Louis Farrakhan. Treat him the way we treated Kahane. He was beyond the pale. There are now people who are cabinet ministers who are direct political descendants. I have to say personally, I find that pretty troubling. My country was able to call out Kahane for what he was not too long ago.
Okay, so I find that troubling too. But it's part of democracy, and and hundreds of thousands of people are demonstrating in the streets of Israel against the racism.
Yeah.
And there is now a movement to get him removed as a minister. To me, that's democracy, that's active, that's fighting racism, that's fighting bigotry, etc. And you know what? Every country has its bigots. Every country, you look at Europe, look how many of them are in government. Nobody is yelling and screaming that these are racist states, apartheid states, that they shouldn't have the right of nationalism, self-determination. It's only when Israel is too many Israel. Sure, I don't like it. I think it's a stigma, but I see Israel fighting it much more. You know, ironically, there's more demonstration against the anti-democratic forces in Israel than I see in the United States. Okay.
Yeah.
And I am proud what's happening. I'm not happy what's happening.
Right.
I'm proud of it.
Okay. Let me turn to David Saperstein then. David, how do you describe what's legitimate criticism and what's anti-Semitism?
First, we should keep in mind that being too broad in accusing people of being anti-Semitic here in cases where there is significant murkiness about it, or it clearly is not, but it is helpful to the argument to call them anti-Semites, really undercuts the ability to actually address anti-Semitism. We should be careful about that. The three of us have common standards, but on the spectrum of where you draw the line, I think I fall a little bit more broadly and liberally in terms of some of these issues. So let me just give you some quick examples of this. I think that when Jonathan said, if anything by any name is aimed at Jews because they're Jews, it is anti-Semitic, I agree 100%. I think if someone says the Jewish people do not have a right to have a national presence in their 3,000-year-old historic homeland, I think it crosses a line here. However, I think if someone says, you know, the system on the West Bank in the occupation, that is two different sets of laws, completely different sets of laws governing the populations, their denial of fundamental rights to Palestinians. There are efforts of those right-wing groups to ethnically cleanse it with settler attacks, and the government isn't doing what it should do to attack. That is an example of apartheid policies. I don't think that crosses a line into anti-Semitism. While if someone says this is an apartheid state like South Africa was, so inherently to evil, it has no right to exist as it is, I think that crosses the line. So that test, those tests about a Jew as Jew, or this, so anti-Semitism, as Abe said, if someone's against a national project and thinks it's a source of evil, and they're also anti-Zionist, that's one thing. If someone, by saying, I'm against Zionism, because in the name of Zionism, as we have seen it actually live, all kinds of terrible things have been done to Palestinians. I don't think making that statement crosses over the line when they say that's why I'm anti-Zionist. But if it is, I'm an anti-Zionist because I don't think the people, the Jewish people, have a right to have a national identity. That crosses over the line. So I would draw the line further out, I think, than either of my colleagues would here today. And I think that is actually protect us in terms of keeping agreement on what really is anti-Semitism and keeping our allies focused on standing with us when Israel is attacked in terms of its right to exist, or Jews are ever attacked as Jews.
Abe or Jonathan, does either of you want to talk further on this point? No. Well, then a second question that I'd like to hear from all of you about is the utility of teaching history, the utility of it. It's in Darrell Horn, the writer, was I thought quite good on this in her book about how everybody loves dead Jews. That we were overemphasizing, the Jewish community was overemphasizing the Holocaust, that we should be talking instead about having invented the weekend, that we should be talking, she said, instead of inventing this, maintaining a 3,000-year-old book club that meets every week. That there are all kinds of things about Jewishness and Judaism that are positive and that aren't necessarily about the Holocaust. As you've already mentioned, we're losing the generation that experienced it. Abe, not you. You experienced it firsthand. You're still with us. But it's 80 years ago. It happened 80 years ago. I did the subtraction and figured out that in the mid 40s, when my father came back from Europe from the war, and then when I was born a couple of years later, 80 years before that was the Lincoln assassination. That was pretty old. That was history, and this is becoming history for people as well. Should there be some rethinking about what it is that Jews are saying to the broader American public that is in some way opposing the possible growth of anti-Semitism? Jonathan Sarna, is that legitimate?
I devoted my life to Jewish history, and I certainly agree that when we look back, we have so focused on 20 years of destruction that people know nothing about 2,000 years of great civilization and accomplishment. And indeed, it is quite disturbing that the only thing that is taught about Jews in many public schools is the Holocaust. Once upon a time, at least people learned about Chaim Solomon and the American Revolution.
He didn't make it. He didn't make it into the PBS American Revolution series. By the way,
no,
I was
but
waiting, and he didn't. He didn't turn
didn't
up.
make it in. No, and there were Jews, and the reason it's important is a lot of people don't even know that Jews have been in America for so long, and the whole discussion of Christian nationalism in the United States, talk about nationalism, really reflects the lack of knowledge of Jewish history. I have to say, I think it's very sad that so little American Jewish history is known in Israel. That's half the Jewish people, and they know nothing about it. And I think that were we to look at American Jewish history, we would see much more than just the history of destruction, and we would learn how vital American Jews have been to the very definition of what America is. If we talk about a pluralism, if we talk about the Statue of Liberty, there's Emma Lazarus's poem which defined the Statue of Liberty. And if we wear blue jeans, we remember one of the Jewish contributions. So there is much that we have not taught people in focusing solely on the Holocaust. We dare not forget the destruction, and I think more that there just has to be a middle ground. And I have to say, most of my students don't understand why we needed a Jewish state. They knew nothing about the fact that in the 20s and the 30s, those refugees who had nowhere to go, that made a big impact. They couldn't get into America. No country would accept them. And that's why people said we should create a Jewish state that will take them in. Maybe the whole history would have been different if America had truly said, give me your tired, your poor, instead of closing its doors in 1924.
Let me ask Abe Foxman your thoughts about
Um, well,
Jews, anti-Semitism, and history.
well, first of all, it's never an either or. You know, we
Fair
should
enough.
do both.
Yeah.
And also, we should need to understand that certainly in America, geography and history are neglected subjects. American students finish their American history by Civil War, maybe. Certainly, they don't know geography. So if they don't know about, it's part of the total problem of education and the problem of education. On the other hand, I've never been taken with Dara Horn's argument. I think, we can't have it both ways. She complains that in China, Darbin, they talk about the Jews who helped, you
Right.
can't have it. Either you want them to know the Jews helped Darbin in the time of Tsaris, or you don't. So if they do it, we say they're doing it for tourism and dead Jews. We want museum. We built a museum of U.S. Holocaust and Memorial. We're building museums because to us, it's the trauma. 1/3 of our people were destroyed in our lifetime, at least in my lifetime. So it's not, it's not the exodus of from Egypt. And 2,000 years later, we're still celebrating and commemorating it 8 days of the year. So this is part of history. We take history seriously. I will say, though, that what Professor Sarna just mentioned, I think part of the problem of this new generation not understanding Israel is they don't understand the Holocaust. I think that any individual, certainly Jewish individual, who understands what happened during the Holocaust is a Zionist. Because if you understand, here were Jews living all over Europe. In some countries, they've made it. In Germany, they made it. In Austria, they made it. And all of a sudden, overnight, it changed and there was nowhere to go. America was closed. The world was closed. The Jews had no. If you understand that moment in history, you understand why Jews are Zionists. You understand why the Jewish people are so, aside from religious reasons, aside from history, why this is a pragmatic insurance need. And it's our security. And you take a look at now, who would have believed in my lifetime that American Jews would be looking for alternatives? Where do you go from the Golden to Medina? Do you go to Israel? I think fine. Or do you go to Portugal or Costa Rica? Wow, what a situation we're in. But if you understand that the world was closed to Jews and there was no place for Jews to go, had there been a Jewish state, 6 million wouldn't have died, then you're a Zionist. And then you should be a Zionist.
Okay. And David?
I stand by what my two colleagues said.
What they've said. I was thinking about the events that preceded the Holocaust, the defeat of Germany in World War I, the complete economic collapse of Germany that wiped out the middle class and made people very receptive to extremists. And then I also remembered that, in the 1880s, there was an assassination of a czar that led to a terrible crackdown and explained perhaps why a few years later my grandparents all packed it in and got out of Tsarist Europe. And then it occurred to me that the 21st century in America begins with 9/11, which proceeds to lead to two very long and somewhat inconclusive wars. It then leads us to the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, and then to the COVID pandemic. And if I had come of age in that period, I would. There are a lot of people who wouldn't even agree with me that the development of a vaccine and getting a vaccine for COVID to market in the time that it did was a miraculous piece of technology and coordination. There are some people think that was completely bungled, the COVID. it's been a time that has left a lot of Americans feeling that their system has failed them. It's not up to the challenges it faces. Things don't work. And maybe this hasn't been as bad a time. I don't know. What do you think? Maybe this has been for people who weren't already established and grown up at the turn of the 21st century. It's been a pretty awful time to grow up in America. You have there's no warm, wonderful time to remember that to get all nostalgic about. It's been one crisis after another. I think that has to do something with softening the ground for the anti-Semites.
Professor Sarna, you're writing a book on Mark Twain. Mark Twain, when he came back from a trip to Europe, what he wrote and reported in an essay was, wherever he went, he found anti-Semitism. Rich people, poor people, smart people, stupid people, atheists, religious, they're all anti-Semites.
Mm-hmm.
He looked for an answer. He came up with an answer, which I will tell you, till recently, I rejected. And I'm not sure that Mark Twain was wrong. Mark Twain said it was jealousy of Jewish success. Jewish survival, despite everything, Jews survived with their values, and they did well. And in all these societies, Jews, even in the Pale, in the shtetl, as bad as it was compared to their neighbors, they did well. And he has a paragraph which, Professor Sarna, you're going to have to deal with, which some people have used to say, well, he wasn't really a Philo-Semite, because he said, and there's this guy Herzl floating around, and he wants all the Jews in one place. Can you imagine all the smart Jews in one place in Palestine? What would happen? I don't think it's anti-Semitic, but maybe jealousy is, look at us. And so when people say flaunted, tell them what you've done to the world, I'm not sure it works that well. The museum in Philadelphia on Jewish achievements isn't a great seller. I'm not sure, especially, Robert, what you're saying with the atmosphere, that nobody is happy with anything, and yet we're okay. We have this pride. We have these...
Right.
We're sticking in there. We did Salk, and we did this, and look what we did, etc. I'm not sure that's the philosophy. That's the approach we should use. I don't know the answer. But if it is jealousy, it's a bruch. So what do? You don't succeed?
Yeah.
No one tell your kids to be number 2 and number 3. So that's a very serious dilemma if that's one of the reasons.
Well said. Well said. Yes, Jonathan.
Yeah, I'm glad that Abe will publicize my book. I think Mark Twain thought a great deal about anti-Semitism because he had seen it and knew what it could do. He saw it in Austria, in Vienna, with an anti-Semitic mayor. I think that there is much. I, by the way, believe that passage is much misunderstood. I think that was part of his satire.
He was a great humorist. Yes, he was.
And then he says that if the horses knew theirs, we wouldn't be able to ride them. In other words, if getting together is powerful, and the thing that people most feared was Jews coming together and showing their power. And Mark Twain says that's exactly what they should do. Don't be afraid to exercise power. And for Mark Twain to have said that was remarkable. And it's worth remembering today that, yes, there is anti-Semitism in American tradition. My friend Pam Nadell calls it an American tradition. But there's also the opposite. And there were remarkable Americans who embraced Jews and promoted Judaism. And we need to remember both, and we need to push the positive against the negative.
Professor Sarna, thank you. David, do you have one last word you'd like to add?
Sure. I mean, if I could write the script going on, I would say to American Jews, at the end of this 75-year period of a golden age, you can either get a passport or go back to Poland and Germany, where surprisingly, a number of Jews are going because they had the family connections there.
Berlin is a scene.
Here.
Berlin's a Jewish scene, yes.
Or we can save that golden age. And that's where we have to focus. We have to raise educational levels. We have to mobilize those. Every group has been affected by hate crimes, religious group, ethnic group, racial group, by the rising number. We're in it together. We have to rebuild those coalitions. But whenever any kind of anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism or hatred of Israel raises its head in them, we have to be able to prepare to fight, not allow those coalitions to be manipulated. It's why we stay in here. We have to save our democracy, and we have to make the lessons of the Holocaust here alive here, where we see what was happening in 33 and 34 here beginning to repeat itself here in America. And the time to stop that is at the earliest time possible. Those lines have to be drawn for the sake of the Jewish community and the sake of America.
I'd like to thank all of our three guests. Thank you, David Saperstein and Jonathan Sarna and Abe Foxman. And many thanks to Joshua Ploud and Roni Giuliano of American Friends of Rabin Medical Center, which produces Global Connections. And thanks to our technical director, Bobby Grandone. Our program sponsor is the American Friends of Rabin Medical Center, which is a 501c3 national charitable organization representing in the United States Israel's largest hospital, Rabin Medical Center in Petach Tikva in Greater Tel Aviv. Stay tuned for next month's Global Connections. You can watch and listen to past Global Connections on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Robert Siegel, and this has been Global Connections, Navigating the New Normal. See you next month. Stay healthy and stay safe.